And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Friday edition of the Paranormal Portal, and happy Friday 13th to you all out there. Hope you've had a wonderful day. Hope you've had a great week, and it's now over. And you're now relaxing and unwinding and doing whatever it is you do on the weekends, and one of which I hope is always tuning into the Paranormal Portal. But that's just me. That's just me throwing out an easy line. So, but before I go any further, I guess I should welcome my good friend and co-host, Mr. Don Longbeard, to the show.
Hey all, happy Friday the 13th.
How's your Friday the 13th been going down?
You know, it's been a long day, but it's been a good day. I'm awake, unlike I was last Friday, thank God. But here, bright and shiny and ready to listen to Miss Linda about Dogsman.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, a lot of people always freak out about Friday the 13th, and some people are just so superstitious about it.
Yeah.
But I swear that always, at least at the very minimum, they're decent days. But I've had some of the best days on Friday the 13th, so maybe I'm just contrary or something. I'm not sure what's wrong with me, but I guess I'll take it. I mean, it's just it's one of those things, and I realize that, you know, it's just another bump on the calendar. It's just another rising and setting of a sun and stuff.
Right. Yep.
But, you know, some people really look at the symbology and all of that, and perhaps there's something to do with the numerology about it. I wonder where that ever started, actually, the whole Friday the 13th thing.
I don't know.
I don't know either. I guess that'd be worth looking into sometime.
Crystal
but
Lake.
Crystal Lake?
Yes.
Oh, the movie?
No, Jason.
Jason, yeah. Well, that's what I mean, yeah. Jason Voorhees, yeah.
Voorhees.
Maybe it was just a thing of popular cult fiction kind of stuff.
That's probably it.
I'm sure it has, and I'm sure it has grounding somewhere. It's probably the date of some horrible massacre or something.
Probably,
and,
you know, Valentine's Day.
Yeah, that kind of
Valentine's
thing.
Day massacre. Yeah.
Which is not why we celebrate it.
No, that's not. But, yeah. It was interesting.
It was interesting. That's for sure. But we are, of course, here and have a wonderful show planned for you all tonight. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you are as excited as we are. But welcoming back to our show once again is Mrs. Linda Godfrey, who is an established author, researcher, and just amazing all-around person. But welcome back to the show, Linda.
Well, thanks so much to have me. I'm really glad to be back.
Yeah, we're really thrilled to have you. And of course, last time you were on, we had a 2-hour show, but it feels like we barely dented the subject matter of, you know, of the range of your experience and expertise and research. And so I'm really thrilled that you agreed to come back so quickly after. But we got so much great feedback on the show, and people are like, oh my God, you got to get her back. That was so awesome. And so here you are, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad to be back. Well, and that last time too, we had the venerable Lee Hampel, owner of what I call the mini Skinwalker Ranch. So he had a lot of good stuff to say, and actually, we're setting up another very similar stakeout as to the one that I described, where we had the light sphere come at us across the field. So maybe I'll have something else to talk about in a week or so. I'm sort of wanting it to happen again, and then sort of hoping it doesn't, because we don't know what those things are.
Right.
You know, and there are just as many theories for good as for bad, or bad as there are for good, I should say. So it's just, you know, and it's the same thing. You think about if you're going, people will say, well, I'm going to go run, you know, just drive all around Bray Road or some other place, or you know, the big forest in Michigan, and just see if I can run into one. Well, do you really want to do that? Have you really thought that through? How would you feel? I'm not sure. You know, I mean, I have seen Bigfoot, I think the same one, several different times in the daylight from not that far away. And it was awe-inspiring, because you realize there's something you really don't know how you would deal with it. And the one time when I was on foot, I just, you know, backed up and left and proceeded quickly to leave, because how do you know, and even people who go in, you know, with heavy, large guns, bear hunting guns, that kind of thing. And would not advocate anyone trying to shoot one, but in a couple of cases where they have felt that it was pretty dicey, and they needed to do so or protect a pet in one case, the bullets didn't have any effect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know there are some who say that they do. You find the opposite message too, and maybe there are just variations in the creature itself or whatever. But just to have as many reports as there are saying that the bullets don't work make you really, really wonder about it.
Yeah. And I think it's the sheer scale of these beings that just it totally takes people right out of their paradigm. It takes them right out of their comfort zone. And from what I understand, and I've never come face to face with a Bigfoot. I've had one behind me, I'm sure, when I was younger, growling, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around because I was just terrified. But it was just that presence is so large and it's so wholly intimidating. Now, I've heard that from many different researchers talk about infrasound. Do you have any opinion on the use of infrasound either in the Dogman or the Bigfoot or anything like that?
Well, I think it's entirely possible because we're not talking about some, theory that nobody knows about. Infrasound is very well studied, and we do know that large mammals like tigers and elephants both use it for different reasons probably, but they both use infrasound. That's scientific fact. So if Bigfoot is indeed a natural mammal, then why would it not have, and it's, definitely weighs as much, the large Bigfoot must weigh as much as, say, a tiger. So why could they not also emit these infrasound waves? And it's been shown, there was this incident called, I think that the name of the book was The God and the Machinery or something like that, where they discovered there was a lab in England where people were getting sick and having weird experiences in this lab. And one of the scientists there accidentally discovered that there was a machine below the floor that when it went on, it was producing sound waves at certain decibels that they could measure and tell which ones were going to make people sick. So we know that from just testing and that sort of thing that's been done, that it can have very slight to more dire effects on human beings. Everything from just a slight headache or dizziness, all the way to rather serious illness or seizures. And that's one of the things that they're looking at right now. I'm sure people have seen this in the news, where ambassadors and British citizens have been, the British citizens were attacked with poison, it's believed, but there have been the others, the ambassadors. I'm kind of grasping for the country that this happened in, probably just as well I don't say, but it was in all the news too that they thought maybe they were being bombarded with infrasound. I believe this was our ambassadors that were in Cuba for a while. I'm thinking that's where it happened, and it's a well-known news article. It's nothing that's in strange journals or anything like that. So this is something that exists in our world that's becoming well understood, that we know large mammals can use. And so if Bigfoot is a large mammal, well, why wouldn't he be able to use it too? We don't know his body structure to rule it out. And if Bigfoot isn't, well, then we can't say for sure what he does or doesn't do in any means, but he certainly could emit some sort of sound frequency, I would think. If it's at least some type of unknown energy or manifested from some other energy that we don't understand, it can do what it wants, I would think, or what it would have other abilities that we can barely fathom in most cases, I would think.
Right. Yeah. And of course, it seems that they have an unnatural vocal range anyway, just in their hollers and their yells and their sounds that they make, including when you're listening to things like the Sierra Sounds, Ron Moorhead's recordings of the Sierra Sounds I think they're from the 70s, but up in the Sierra Mountains, Sierra Nevada mountains, weren't they? And I'm sure you're familiar with those as well, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, those are very, very creepy.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And they're heard, identical sounds are heard in all kinds of other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not just the Sierras.
No, that's an interesting point now, and that's a consideration. I know that you do Bigfoot research as well, and you do the Dogman research, and you do a myriad of other researches. But when it comes to Bigfoot, do you believe that as widespread as they are, basically covering the globe, but from what I understand, or at least they have relatives everywhere, across the ocean.
So. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they also would have a common language, or do you think it would be much like people that are separated? Would they, develop their own language, or is it a language, or is it some other form of communication? Do you think? And this is a totally theoretical jump of logic, but I'm just curious what you would consider in this situation.
Yeah, for me, I feel it's impossible to say really, but I know that they can imitate. At least imitate a very wide range of sound, and that they are seen and heard making very high-pitched whistles, and then also, I've experienced this myself, extremely low, loud growling sounds. And then in between, a number of people have heard them talking in a dialect that sounds something like Mandarin Chinese.
Right.
And then there's this other where I've had reports from people that have said it was chasing them. They said that they could hear it making this sound that I sound really stupid when I do it because I have kind of a high voice, but it's something like habada hum habada hum. It's just this weird repeated vowel sounds in a very deep throaty way. And I think that I've heard one make imitative speech sounds, at least once, and it's only because my last house where we lived for 23 years, and I'll add we lived there for 23 years, and I did not start seeing any sort of creatures until we lived there 20 years. So it was the last 4 or 5 years that we lived there. So I guess that would be. Well, I'm off on my math, but you get the idea. It was only the last from about 2012 to when we moved like 2 years ago that these things started being right in the area, or I was able to finally perceive them somehow. I'm not sure which it is, but I wasn't the only one. But we lived on the edge of the Kettle Moraine State Forest, and we were not in the forest proper, but we were in the surrounding areas where these deep pockets of earth were scooped out by the last glacier, and they were so steep-sided that the settlers called them kettles because they looked like those big black kettles that you'd hang over a campfire. And so we, our particular house had an acre back there, and all along one side and in the back it all dropped down into kettles that were a system. They'd have ridges between and then there'd be another one, and there were acres of these and kind of leading in a path back to the actual forest. So it would be only and I had sightings reported from all around the Kettle Moraine State Forest going back to 1991-92 when I first wrote the story of the Beast of Bray Road. I got replies not just about things that looked like upright dogmen, but Bigfoot, where the people were sure that it was Bigfoot. And many of them were from around that Kettle Moraine area, and they went back at least to the 1960s. Wow. So it's not like I was making up all of a sudden something was there, because I really think just from what I've read and my own observations that they have little family groups that stay together in one place, but they all forage widely, and they would need to in order to feed those, huge bodies that they have. And they're always out looking for deer and plants and berries and other things that they eat, and trying to dodge around humans and probably develop habits of going places when the humans aren't usually around. Well, this was an evening, I'm going to say it was probably like 2015, and I had made supper. My husband and I usually take turns making supper. He was out somewhere in the yard, and I couldn't find him, and I wanted to let him know dinner was ready. And I had no reason to think. Now, we had a very kind of a large octagonal deck that was built to sort of hang over this this kettle, because it was very, very, very steep right by our house. Oh, okay. I had no reason to think that he was down in those kettles for any reason. Almost nobody went down in them, because if you go down in them, they're very steep-sided for one thing. They're very treacherous to get down in. You know, I've rolled down on the seat of my pants more than once in different tunnels. And also there are brambles, there are, you know, bugs and things like that. And they're just not nice, smooth pathways to be in. You can get tripped up on roots, lots of vines and things hanging in your way. So for some reason, I walked over on that deck and just kind of said, "Steve, dinner." And down below, and it was not just in the kettle next to my house, but this was adjoined by an even deeper kettle next to it. So it was way kind of down below. And these kettles act as amphitheaters. I heard this voice that, if you remember Bowser on Sha Na Na.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how deep his voice was. It sounded like Bowser on Sha Na Na, only maybe even deeper.
Oh, my.
And it said, "Oh, hello, hello."
Oh, jeez.
Exactly
wow.
like that.
Ooh.
And I just, my skin just blanched, you know, and I just left. That's all I do in those situations. Other people say, "Well, I would just run to it, you know, and pet it or whatever." Well, I did, you know, I was just going out to call my husband in for dinner, so I wasn't loaded with cameras or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I finally found him. He was like totally on the other side of the yard, talking to a neighbor somewhere. So, you know, he had nothing to do with it. And there was only one neighbor in our entire neighborhood that I could even imagine might try and make a low voice like that. And I finally got up the nerve and asked him if by any chance he was, you know, kind of playing a trick on me, or, and this is a guy who's like probably over 70. And so I doubt he's crawling down in those kettles anyway, but he was sort of offended, you know, and said no. But then I remembered his wife would often sit out on a deck behind their house, which was the next one. We had acre lots, so the houses weren't real close, but it was the one next to ours. She would sit on her chair outside on the patio talking on her cell phone. And when she answered, she'd say, "Oh, hello, hello," like that.
Wow. Okay.
So it was her hello that it had heard.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
That is so interesting. Yeah.
I didn't see it that day, but I've seen it in the neighborhood enough other times that I can't come up with any other explanation.
Right. Wow, that is really cool. And of course, they're well known as being mimics and stuff. As far as even in the First Nation accounts and legends, they're known as the great mimics and imitators. So that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, they're supposed to, and it wasn't like it was a long, complicated sentence. It was just something that he could have heard her say many, many times, and maybe that's what they thought they would get my attention, or I might walk down there or something. I don't know, but I just backed up, and I can't remember. It seems to me on the last show I was going to tell about my sightings, and I can't remember. I don't think that I did. I think we got into
the trail cam stuff and what the research with Lee had been. But please.
Right, exactly. But you may find this interesting.
Absolutely.
It was over the course of a year that I had these 3 sightings, and this was 2014. And there were fields. I like to walk all around that neighborhood. There were lots of roads with very little traffic on them, and many times there were fields and things next to them, or woods or kettles that dropped off. So it was a really nice place to walk. And this one morning, I just got this yen to just go for a walk. I didn't even think about it. I didn't have my camera with me or anything. I thought, I'm just going to go walk for 20 minutes, and then it'll be easier to sit and, type or something for a while. So I set off, and there was a field that I passed. And I always like to look at that field because there were sandhill cranes that nested in it.
Oh.
And sometimes they were really close to the road. And the field was surrounded by gray fence posts. And I looked over just to see if there were any sandhill cranes, and I see this black thing sticking up from kind of in the center of the field. And the sun was behind it, so I couldn't see its face. The face was kind of overshadowed.
Uh-huh.
But it was all black fur, and it was way larger than a sandhill crane. I'd seen sandhill cranes out there many, many times, and they're tall, and they can have a pretty, like 4-foot wingspan at least.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more than that. They're fairly big birds, but this was much bigger than the sandhill crane. It did not have that skinny little neck. And all I could see was like the head. It was kind of a big, sort of roundish head with the black fur, and part of what went to the shoulders. It's hard to explain exactly, but I looked at that and I kind of stopped and I was thinking, well, why would they have put a fence post out in the center of that field?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You know.
Right.
Because then they just have to mow around it, you know, and why would they do that? And then I looked over at the fence posts, and the fence posts were much smaller and lighter color. They were a dark gray, but they were still lighter than this thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, duh. There never was a fence post there. I should know that. And I looked back, and as soon as I looked back at it, it started slowly lowering down into this hay that was growing up. It was like a hay field.
Uh-huh.
And I can't think of any other animal that size, that color. There were no ears sticking up,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I thought of a bear. This is not bear country, but once in a while, one will run through now and then.
Sure.
But it couldn't have been a bear. It was way too big to be something like a cat or anything else. And obviously, since I couldn't see a tail or anything like that, it appeared to be crouching and, you know, peeking up over this hay and then crouching down back in.
Oh.
So that was when I realized what I was dealing with, because when you eliminate all possibilities,
Right.
you know, and that's what people that I talk to that have sightings, that's what they say. It's like they run through this Rolodex in their brain trying to think what it is. And it's when they realize they've run out of Rolodex cards and nothing fits that they get very
Right.
scared. So for those younger people who are listening to this broadcast, a Rolodex was something before computers, where you had all your little address cards on this little kind of roll that you could flip around on real quickly to find things. So I'm sure there are people listening who never heard of a Rolodex, but that's what it is.
That's funny, because I would have never thought about that, but you're right. That is a totally generational thing.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, it is. Who has those anymore? But the next time was in a field that was closer to a main road that we drove by all the time to get to our house. And my husband and I called it the animal field, and we always slowed way down. It was kind of just around a curve, and usually there were cornfields planted in it. And we would see like flocks of turkey. Lots of times the turkeys were right in the road, and big flocks, like 20, 25 turkeys at once, or big herds of deer all moving around in there. So there was always something to see. So I slowed down just in case of turkeys. I was probably doing maybe 20 miles an hour, just going around this curve. And it was kind of like the other one, because the cornfield, this was a little bit later in the year, and the cornfield had been harvested already. So the ground was pretty much bare except for a little bit of cornstalk chaff, you know, blowing around a bit.
Sure.
And I thought I saw this big black tree trunk, like, again, right out in the open in the field. You know, I could see the whole thing. It was maybe like half a football field away from me, and maybe about 30 or 40 feet at most away from a kettle that was sort of in the middle of that field and had trees growing out of it.
Wow.
And I just, you know, when you're idly just driving and looking, you're not really, just these questions hit you. And I thought, well, again, why did that farmer leave that stump there? You know, he must have to mow around it all the time. And it was so odd looking because where it met the ground, it had kind of protrusions that were sticking out, and it looked like part of a branch had been left on it. It was held up in the air, like kind of shaped like a tree branch.
Right.
And again, the sun was behind it, and I couldn't see a face, but it was completely black and looked like it was covered with something soft, like fur. And then just as I passed it and there was a shrub blocking my view of it, I thought, well, yeah, again, there is no stump there. And I slammed on the brakes. I backed up as fast as I could. And it was gone.
Wow. Well,
and anything that was even if it were a bear, I would have seen it running away in the fields because there were all kinds of adjacent fields.
Right. Linda,
And
we're gonna take our first.
I'll just say real quick. It dove down into that kettle.
Wow. That's amazing. We're gonna take our first break, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be, of course, right back in a couple minutes. So don't go away for more of Linda Godfrey and the Paranormal Portal.
Extendivite.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Don Longbeard.
That would be me.
And we are burning the Friday night away, and
Yes.
it's been an amazing show. Already a half hour has gone by. Our special guest tonight, of course, is Linda Godfrey, who is just a phenomenal researcher and author into the Dogman and Bigfoot and other cryptids and paranormal phenomena. So welcome back, Linda.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, that first break just kind of snuck up on us.
It did,
Oh,
yeah.
it did, yeah, it did. And I just wanted to end it really quickly.
Mhm.
It did jump into that kettle. I'm quite sure. And can you
Wow.
imagine, from being as far away as it was, how quickly it would have had to have moved
Right.
to have done that to get completely out of my sight.
It is just amazing. And their physical feats are nothing short of Herculean, from what I understand. Just the agility, the strength, the speed, the cunning. I mean, they're just amazing physical athletes. I don't, for lack of a better term, but I mean, they are truly the ninja of the forests.
Yeah, I think that's a good term.
Yeah.
So, well, I did see it once more in that area, and it was a couple months later. It was winter, and we'd had an ice storm, and I was going past that same field that I just had mentioned. My husband was driving this time, and I glanced over at the tree line of that kettle in which that creature had disappeared, because after that I was always looking every time I went by. And I just yelled, "What the heck is that?" Because there was something. The trees were all still covered with that frosty, icy mix, so they were all white. And something that was completely black. At first I thought it was like a man in a black snowmobile suit. That was my first impression. And the closer we got, the more I realized it was not. And again, the face was completely dark. But it was like positioned on one of the trees, and these trees were growing up from out of the kettle, so I wasn't seeing the trunk. I was seeing part of the tree that was growing up from the bottom, and it had climbed up so that it was about at ground level, and there was a large branch, and it was moving. It had both its hands on that branch, and it was moving it up and down just like an old-fashioned pump handle.
Oh, wow.
Ever seen those, the pumps where they got a handle? Again, for younger viewers, this was how your great-great-grandparents probably got their water on the farm. They had to go out and actually pump this handle up and down, and that's what it was doing. And I just was astounded. And before I could figure out what it was, I'm like yelling at my husband, "Stop, stop, stop." Well, he was trying to get back in time to see a basketball game. So, he's like, "Well, no, we'll just go home and then you can come back." And I'm like, "Honey, it doesn't work that way."
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the lure of the basketball game was too strong. So we went back. I drove back, and of course, it was gone by then. And I've often wondered what it was really doing. At first, I thought maybe it was trying to signal one of it. Maybe that's what they did to signal each other across the field, because there were more of these openings with the trees. But the more I've thought about it since, because I think about these things all the time. They just don't leave you. When you see something like these things, it doesn't leave you. I really think that it was trying to break that branch off for some reason, maybe to help build a little bit more of a snow shelter for itself down on the bottom, because the bottom was filled. I did manage to get permission from the owner of that land. I hadn't gone out and looked, but I did manage to get permission from the owner to go and look at that kettle with a couple of colleagues, which I was able to do once. And then the gentleman was elderly and he passed away, and I wasn't able to get the permission again. But it did look like there were, clusters of branches, such as you often see when they are habituating someplace. And by the way, I should add that these kettles that were on these cornfields and hayfields would have been just glorious places to kind of hide out and wait for deer to go by, and in the autumn when the corn was high, they wouldn't even have to hide out. They could just kind of lurk here and there and then drag it right down into one of the kettles that was right there. So I think that probably he was trying to just remove this branch and snap it off, knowing most likely that people would take it for that snapping sound you hear when there's an ice storm and the branches snap off.
Right, that's true. And it seems to me that from what I understand, and I'm of course no expert at all, but from what I understand, these are incredibly intelligent beings.
I think so.
And if you saw this one 3 times, do you think it was always the same one, or do you just think you just kept seeing some of this family group?
Right.
Well, it was always about the same size, and it
Okay.
had that same kind of roundish head,
Okay.
and it was the very soft black fur, kind of like a coal black, not the darkest black possible, but a fairly dark color. And there have been others. One about that color also was seen by my next door neighbor in that area. And he was like a 70-year-old Hispanic man who had no idea what a Bigfoot was. But he somehow found out that I was writing these books, and it was really, he's not been in good health lately, and it was really just before all that happened, or I go back and I've wanted to videotape him and just couldn't do it. But he saw one go, it ran right past him within maybe about 10 feet and his house has a kettle bordering on the back of it too that matches up to ours. And he said he'd heard something at the garbage can outdoors, and he went out to look, and he turned around, and all of a sudden this huge thing with dark fur went hurtling past him and leaped down into the kettle.
Oh my God! Wow.
And he said it wasn't a bear. He said it wasn't a dog. It wasn't any big cat. He didn't know what it was. But he said what he kept saying was, "Man, was that thing fast."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no doubt there.
And that's what,
Yes.
that's what you hear. But what I was thinking is that I think, it's been, what I've heard reported is that they become familiar with people that happen to be in their range. And
I think it's true. I do.
Right, I think so too. And I've heard, cases of them even following people's cars because they can distinguish the sound and they know when that person is coming or going, and sometimes they'll track them back to their house or whatever. But what I'm thinking is that they must have chosen to reveal themselves to you.
Right.
In other words, because they're just so smart, and so if they could have heard you coming long before any person would have heard you, and out in the country you can hear a car coming forever away.
Yep.
Right. Well, that's true. Yeah. So it's just hard to say, but I think I mentioned last time, I don't know if I went into it, my first experience in 2012 when I was in another area of the kettles just taking a walk on a road. And again, it had just been, that was the one where the branch was twisted and snapped off.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was maybe 150 feet from it and just saw it. I could see the branch. I couldn't see the creature because it was a living, huge oak tree with tons of foliage on it.
Oh,
And it was standing on one of the upper branches, evidently, or crouching, knowing that this foliage would hide it well enough. And did I tell you this story? I can't remember. I don't want to.
It doesn't sound familiar.
Well, what started it was I was just walking along, and there was this nice looking branch on the ground, just like a 1 or 2 inch nice thick branch. And I thought, gee, I've never really tried, banging a stick on a tree and seeing if I get a reaction. And there's nobody around. It was very still. It was probably. I was like a very late Sunday afternoon when anybody who was up there, a lot of the residents there are just weekenders and they're gone already by then on Sunday. And we hadn't had a storm or anything. It was dry. I thought, well, this is a good time. Nobody will see me making a fool out of myself. and I walked in about 10 feet off of this main path that I was on. There was a nice kind of hollow tree. And I took a couple swings at it and got a couple of good sounds. Nothing happened. I thought, well, I'll try one more. Well, I tried one more time, and to my huge shock, got one back from as close as that was. You can imagine how startled I was. And there was no one around. Mm-hmm. Absolutely no one around. And I thought, this can't be. And I hit it again, and I got another knock back. And by now, I was fighting my instinct to run because I was thinking, it can't be anything but a human or a Bigfoot because it has to grasp the stick,
Right.
in order
Yeah.
to make a pounding sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hit it once more, and that's when I heard this tremendous loud snapping, crunching sound, and I saw this. We measured it later. I say we because I had my friend go down with me into the kettle. It was a 35-foot long branch of oak, and you could see it was nice, new, fresh wood. There was nothing wrong with the wood. It wasn't like falling apart or rotting or anything.
Sure.
And then it did one more move where it snapped it off. There was another cracking sound, and that did sound exactly like branches breaking off in an ice storm. But this was August, and it was very warm,
Wow.
so there was no ice on any of those trees. And it like threw this huge branch full of leaves and things all the way down to the bottom of that kettle. And that's when I knew, I mean, you can't imagine a human could do anything like that.
Right.
It was terrifying. And again, I backed up and then I ran home. But I started thinking about it, and that those woods are also infested with woodpeckers. And I thought, well, what if it was full of woodpecker holes? And it was just waiting to come down, and my little whack on that tree, made a vibration, and it was all it needed. Mm-hmm. Or what if, somebody was sitting, a human had, for some unknown reason, decided to go into a kettle, climb up this tree, take a hacksaw and saw part of this branch off.
Right.
And I thought, well, if it did or not, I need to know. And so I called up my friend, Sandra Schwab, who had investigation experience before she moved in the neighborhood. And her 20-year-old daughter happened to be visiting, and so she brought her along. And her daughter was not into, when you're, of a certain age and you've got younger people, they don't really like to identify most of the time with what you're doing because you're the parent, and if the parent is doing it, it can't be cool. So she had no interest, no knowledge, nothing about Bigfoot. She was just kind of along for the ride and walking along. And so Sandra and I went down there and measured the tree. To my satisfaction, there were no marks by saws. There were no woodpecker holes. Like I said, it was nice, fresh wood. And I took a lot of pictures, and you can see them, of this branch, that was fallen down. If you go to my blog, which is just lindagodfrey.com, it's a free, you don't have to sign in or anything. It's just a free blog, lindagodfrey.com. And just in the search box up at the top right, type in Bigfoot branch, and it'll take you to where you can see the pictures of this tremendous branch. And the weirdest thing was that there were two places where the bark had just completely been removed, and nothing was left but the bare, smooth wood underneath. And they were both about 9 inches long and like mitten-sized. And we found one of the pieces of bark. It was just like something, it's like if you laid your hand flat on a piece of paper and then scrunched up by inching your fingers up, that's what it looked like. Wow. And I still have it. I have this one piece of bark. But you could see they were placed perfectly so that whatever was up there was able to bend over, grab this branch with their hands, and at the proper angle to get the torque it needed to twist this thing. Wow. And you can imagine the pounds per square inch pressure that must have been applied to twist off a living branch of I mean, if he could hire himself out to the tree trimmer people, he could probably make a fortune. They wouldn't have to send the guys up in the cherry picker trucks, with the machine saws. But there was nothing to indicate that anything had weakened it. So we went back up to the ridge where her daughter was hanging out, and all of a sudden Natalie screamed, and we're both like, what, where? She was looking a different direction than we were, and she was fortunate enough to see it.
Oh, wow.
And she described it, she said it was like what around here it's called a blonde Bigfoot. It's like kind of gray and light beige mixed together. And she said it went in behind another bunch of bushes that weren't all that far away. And she said, we asked her about it, how it looked, and she said, it was like I would say it wasn't right. It was going real fast, but it wasn't really running. She said, I would say it was like striding was the word she used, which anybody who knows Bigfootology at all knows that's very close to how they're described as moving, but they have sort of a different gait than we do. And so Sandra and I were kind of standing there trying to decide if we wanted to try and get any closer, and all of a sudden it growled at us.
Oh, yep.
See ya.
There was, it was the infrasound. I really, you could. We all had our hair raised up on the neck, and I said, "Okay, ladies, that's our cue to leave now." We've really ticked it off, evidently. And the thing is, where it was hanging out there, that tree was a really great deer path. And people find this even harder to believe than the Bigfoot, but I started frequenting that spot and going there with my good camera, and I found elk droppings. And they're reintroducing elk, but that many years ago, not all that long, about 8 years ago, we're not supposed to be out roaming around southeastern Wisconsin, but I took really great photos. I always have a ruler with me. So I was able to put that down, and I sent it to the Wisconsin DNR, and they had their track experts look at it, and they wrote back and said, "Are there elk in that part of?" I'm like, "Well, you guys are the ones who are supposed to be telling me," but they positively identified it as elk droppings.
Wow.
And I asked all the people who lived within a view of that range of the kettles if they'd seen any elk, and they're all like, "No, we never saw an elk." And I said, "Well, I showed them the picture. People don't want to believe even if they see a picture if it's not supposed to be there." But I'm pretty sure that it was sitting up there waiting to catch its dinner, and I interrupted that process.
Wow. That is just amazing. And then I see, of course, the picture of the tree that you can see where the branch originated from.
Right.
And just the size of that diameter of that piece of wood is just impressive. And to think that there was enough force to twist that off of a tree when it's alive and very healthy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the branch itself was like 8 to 9 inches in diameter and 35 feet long. And, when it hit the floor of that kettle, I mean, it was like this giant boom. It was crazy. Jeez. So,
now are those oak trees? Is that what that is? Is that what you said?
That was an oak tree.
Wow. Yes. That's a tough tree to break too.
Yeah.
It is. It's like some of the hardest wood.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
So, yep. that made, there's a moment where you can intellectually believe, and then you can believe in your gut because and you've experienced it. And that was the day I became a gut believer.
That is really, really cool.
Yeah.
What a profound experience, though, too. And then to be able to go back and recheck that and to get all the specifics. Because it would have been so easy just to go, well, that was strange, that was weird. And but you went back and you got the measurements, you've got photographs. I mean, it's just profound.
Yeah.
And we smelled it. It scent bombed us as well.
Yeah,
so
I understand
that.
I've not smelled that myself, but I understand that that's just a rancid, horrible smell. Would you concur?
Yeah, I've experienced that another time too, in the kettle moraine.
Wow.
With my colleagues Sanjay Singhal and I were walking around in there, and I saw a tree that looked like it would be a really good place for something to climb up. It was old and had gnarls on it and thick, and I walked around behind it just to see if there were any scratch marks or anything, and this overwhelming, overpowering, horrible smell just came over me, and I just had to bend over and then get out of there. And I came around to the front, and Sanjay was bent over the trail going, "What is that?" I hadn't even said anything, and we just left. There was nothing else to do. It was not a skunk. I've smelled plenty of skunks in my lifetime. It was not a skunk, but it had that somewhat skunk-ish smell to it. It was just as equally strong, but not quite the same. And there was absolutely no doubt. And this was it was in the winter. We were winter hiking. So things were in their den. Skunks were in their dens, and it was daylight, daytime. So again, it rules out many other things that might have been doing that. So after you have a number of things happen like that, and I mean, I've had other little things too, and the tough thing is that until like now, I've wrestled with telling these things to the public because I was afraid that people would say, well, how convenient,
Right.
she sees these things and she writes the books, and I just have to say, well, if I were going to make something up, I would make it up about the thing I'm most known for,
Right.
because that's what's, labeled on most of my books is the Dogman, or the, whatever you want to call it, not the Bigfoot, because that hasn't been my area of concern. And there are lots more people studying Bigfoot and looking for Bigfoot, and I would, if I were going to make something up, it would have made a lot more sense for it to be the Dogman, and I wouldn't do that. I think that's a criminal thing to do.
Right.
And I just wouldn't do it. But I finally have started deciding that if I'm going to expect other people to tell me their stories and let them be known, and maybe not their names, but at least let their stories be known in public, that I probably should be willing to do the same and take any flack that comes my way, because I would be lying if I said I didn't see them.
Right. Yeah, and there's, I would assume, and it seems to me that this comes up quite a bit, that the terrain is pretty equally matched for either a Dogman or a Bigfoot. So I mean, to see one in an area, now I don't know, are they agreeable to each other, or are they completely territorial, or what is your opinion on that between the Dogman and the Bigfoot?
Well, I think they both compete for deer.
Okay.
Because they've both been seen, pretty frequently running along with a haunch of deer, or running down a deer, or chasing a deer, or whatever. And what I've seen from tracking the sightings in and around the Kettle Moraine State Park Southern Unit, especially, it's, I was so spoiled. I had this just beautiful study place literally in my backyard for so many years, is that on the inside of the park borders, not exactly, because creatures don't recognize that sort of fence like we do, but on the inside of the Kettle Moraine itself, sightings were way more likely to be of Bigfoot. And then along the edges, where all of a sudden the kettle stopped and you had regular cornfields, then they were more likely to be the Dogman. And there'd be like a little bit of mixing at the borders, but then, one or the other would sort of take over. And my opinion is that they're somehow aware of each other, and they usually work it out that they can each have their own territory and get what they need. I do think that there are, maybe just judging because there are so many more sightings, I think that the Bigfoot population is probably larger and perhaps farther ranging. I don't know that for sure, but there just are so many more Bigfoot sightings than Dogman. So, but and people like to ask me every once in a while, well, okay, say there's a cage match, who's going to win? You throw the Bigfoot and the Dogman equally matched in there. I'd have no idea. I really don't.
Sure.
So
that's the big versus thing that always comes up in our mind. It's like, well, my guy could take your guy. No, my guy could take your guy.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, but I think that it's, I also have that distinction of having experienced several different phenomena as well, and I had the same concerns talking about it on the show. Is it going to be like, well, that's really convenient? Exactly what you're saying is that, I'm the guy doing the paranormal show. Sure, I've experienced everything. That makes perfect sense. But I mean, I have, and I don't know why that is. I don't know, what was so different about me, but I've seen a UFO. I've been in many situations with hauntings and ghosts, and I believe I had a very close encounter with a Bigfoot, and so I understand what you're saying, but I'm sure glad that you did take the stance that you did, because that's, and I agree with you. It's just, it's your experience, and to not acknowledge it, I think would be more of a negative than to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I agree. I finally just had to give myself a good talking to and say, okay, well, and then my publisher really wanted the book that is in production right now to include that. You know, they thought that would be a good thing. And so once I had it written down and you know, I knew it was at the publisher, I thought, well, I may as well start talking about it. It's not a major portion of the book, but it kind of illuminates a couple of other things.
Absolutely.
And again, I just thought it should be recorded. The branch experience I had on my blog since 2012 when it first happened. But I even had my grandson, who was 7 at the time, saw Bigfoot run past our living room window.
Oh, wow.
At last place. Yeah, and he didn't know how to describe a Bigfoot, but he did, you know, just perfectly. And
that was amazing.
I immediately sat him down and video recorded his telling of it. And he was saying things like, well, he was like speed walking. You know, I asked him how he walks. He said he was like speed walking. And then he gave me an example where he went across the living room moving his arms.
Linda?
Whoops.
We ran into break. I don't know why. We didn't get any bumper music.
No
but
bumper music, yeah.
I'm going to go to break here, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Play their games. Everybody loves to place their bets. They don't understand the price I paid. They don't care to comprehend. Trace their lines upon my body, dripping scars across my heart. Raging anger pours inside me as their lies keep falling apart.
This looks extraordinarily bad.
They linger in a perpetual dream state, a nightmare from which they cannot wake. I can't see you, Mommy. Where are you? I've never sensed anything like it. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. They're attracted to the one thing about her that is different from themselves. Her life force. It is very strong. It gives off its own illumination. It is a light that implies life and memory of love and home and earthly pleasures. Something they desperately desire, but can't have anymore. Right now, she's the closest thing to that.
Poltergeist are usually associated with an individual. Hauntings seem to be connected with an area. A house, usually.
Poltergeist disturbances are of fairly short duration, perhaps a couple of months. Hauntings can go on for years.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And I do apologize, we kind of ran into the break on that one, but we usually get bumper music into our feed, and we can, if we're not watching the clock, we can at least hear when the break's coming. But nothing came up for us, so we do apologize. And I of course, the conversation has just been amazing, and I wanted to make sure to point out that Linda Godfrey, of course, who is joining us tonight, is also has a book out there, and I hope you guys will check it out. It's called Monsters Among Us, and let me pull up the panel here so you guys can see it, and you can learn a little bit more about it on her blog. But it's got several different cryptids and phenomena that's covered in this book, and you can find it at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. So definitely check it out, ladies and gentlemen, and all of her other myriad of books as well. She's quite an accomplished author, and is you Linda, you're covering so much ground and such amazing topics. I really like that. I think that's phenomenal because, of course, the Beast of Bray Road, I mean, that in your name is synonymous. That's just known everywhere. But I love that you're covering these other phenomena as well. And it reminds me of one of the first books that I ever read that really got me launched into the paranormal as a child, and that was Charles Berlitz. His books of the mysteries of the unexplained and stuff. And I think that's awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I like to think that I sort of follow in the tradition of John Keel, who's best known for the Mothman and the Mothman prophecies, that
Right.
sort of thing. And yet many people don't know that he actually was also studying UFOs in that same area when that occurred, and that he had well over 100 cases of UFOs and other things, the Men in Black phenomena. And I've often said, and he's the one who came up with this idea that there are windows where worlds interact, and the windows open and all these things come out. And I've observed that myself, where there is a cluster of one strange type of creature, you're often going to find a whole range of weird creatures and phenomena. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's to say I'm only going to pick one and study that. Mm-hmm. When you've got the opportunity, if you're one place and there are lots of weird things that you can choose to study some of the other creatures or phenomena that are around there, why wouldn't you? Sure. How do you know that there isn't a connection between them? And I think it's behooves us to at least consider that and look and make sure we're not missing something that's sitting right in front of our faces. But I always say it's like the old potato chip commercials. No one can eat just one, and no one can really study just one.
Sure. I would agree with you. I think that in some respects, the paranormal researchers are becoming akin to, doctors. Back in the day, there was just doctors. And now, mm-hmm. Now, of course, there's specialists. And there are those that choose to specialize and devote all of their time and energy into it. But personally, I like your approach where you cover more than one thing, because it's also interesting. And you're right. I really think that's profound in that one thing may be very well indicative of another thing. And to ignore other approaches and other phenomena that may be happening in the same area, you're right, would be like, I mean, it couldn't truly be research at that point, right? Because you'd be ignoring
Right.
some other causalities and possible probabilities or possibilities anyway.
Right. And I've written this several times that, if you're doing that, you're really not investigating. You're just following your own biases and trying to prove your own biases. And that's just not investigation. Or research even, really. It's just looking to prove your own opinions.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah, and now just as we ran into break, you were talking about your grandson having seen one, and I just think that's incredibly powerful because his mind doesn't have any bias in it. It's just an observed phenomenon in its purest form, probably, yeah?
Yeah, and it was such an odd moment. It wasn't like we'd been sitting around a campfire talking about Bigfoot or anything. It was just a normal day. I was taking care of him. Nobody else was in our house, and we had been somewhere, and I think I picked him up from school or something. So, his mind was normally on cookies and milk at that point. And we came into the house, and I stopped to grab his jacket and hang it up. He went running into the living room, which had a big picture window that overlooked our yard which was edged, as I said, in these kettles. Mm-hmm. And I heard him gasp really loudly. And this is a very laid-back kid. He doesn't show excitement a lot, and so I was kind of concerned. I said, What is it? And he said, Grandma, I think I just saw Bigfoot. And I'm like, what? But he was really concerned about it. Mm. So, he told me, and I video recorded his telling of it a second time just to make sure I had it very fresh to the source. But I said, well, what did its head look like? And now, if he was trying to make something up, I think he would have had, something to say about, it had big eyes, it was staring at me and had fangs. And he said, I didn't really get the best look at its head because it was going so fast, it was just like a blur. Wow. And I said, really? And I said, well, what else did you see? And he said, it didn't have any neck. He said there was just the head and the body, and there wasn't any neck. And, of course, that's a standard Bigfoot thing, right. And he said he was covered in dark fur, and he didn't turn and look at my grandson or anything. He just kept going. And that was, and he said, my friend's daughter had used the term striding. My grandson used the term speed walking.
Oh, okay.
That's something he knew about from school and gym class. They had tried speed walk. He said it was like speed walking, and he, imitated that, where your head is not bobbing up and down, your legs are just moving. So I'm like, wow,
right.
It was just almost too much. It was kind of scary to think that it would be that close because it was only a few feet from the house itself. I mean, it was very up close. And I did find an imprint. I went outside as soon as I could and looked at the corner of the house where it would have gone. And I was figuring that it probably would have either then run across the road and dived into this big kettle, or it could have gone to that neighbor that saw one and kind of shinnied down his yard and down into that kettle. So it was trying to get one place or the other. I couldn't know, but there was a big print. It wasn't deep enough to cast. I took a couple of photos of it, but that actually creeped me out. That was like too close to home, and
right.
my grandbaby. You don't mess with my grandbaby.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Of course. I guess many people have heard the stories of, the missing 411 David Paulides' work. And
don't even say it.
Yeah. You know what I mean. I do know exactly what you're talking about, and we of course live in the Pacific Northwest over here, and those things always go into my mind when I'm out with my wife and little one mushroom hunting. It's just like, I'm really always cognizant of the fact that, anything could happen at any time. And so, yeah, but I live in town, of course, so I don't have to worry about that many odd things walking by the house. However, we did have a moose in the neighbor's yard once, just this last fall. So that was pretty interesting. But what would you...
I would say that saves you, though, honestly, really.
Yeah.
They're much more... they're much bolder, both the Dogman and the Bigfoot, if recent sightings are to be believed. They're coming into towns, outskirts of towns, and I mean, coyotes have been. There's a huge PBS special on how coyotes have moved into urban areas and taken night cameras and showing them right up on people, walking around people's front porches, and kind of swarming around houses. And if the coyotes can come in and find things, then other things might as well.
That's probably true. I guess I never really considered that, but you're right, and I do believe that in many cases they can be opportunistic, and certainly they know that where there's people, there's edible trash probably, or gardens or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Apparently, wild plum trees too.
Wild plum trees. Yeah. Did you see mine got pulled down out there?
No, huh?
I mean, it was already split, so I think it was the weight of it. But I have a wild plum tree right outside my house. It got split from the snow load, and I think it's because the weight of the fruit as it's developing finally pulled it down to the ground. So I've got one of those. But it's a good point that just because you live in town is by no means a guarantee. Right. I was going to ask you in terms of your sightings, because I'm curious. You hear the different reports from across the map of Bigfoot, and I would like to ask as far as Dogman too. But in terms of the Bigfoot that you've witnessed, what size would you say they are in terms of feet?
Well, the black one that I saw, I figured might be a juvenile, possibly because of the rounded sort of head, and I didn't think it wasn't 9 or 10 feet. It might have been 8. Okay. Maybe 7 to 8, something like that. Probably, and I would say probably closer to 7. Okay. The one that ran across the picture window, I asked my grandson how tall he thought it was, and he was thinking about it because he said it was kind of hunched over and its legs were bent, so he didn't feel that it was in full upright position. But he said it was taller than my dad, and his dad is about 5'8", I think, something like that. So anywhere between 6 and 8, and I'm not sure that was the same one I saw because he seemed to think it was more brown fur and that it was shaggier than what I saw. So there may have been a different one there too, but I'd say anywhere from 6.5 to maybe 7.5 at the tops.
Wow.
These.
Okay. Because you hear the stories. I mean, I've heard some reports even more recently, and these are height ranges that I didn't know were possible. But I've heard in the plus 10 feet range, like 12, 13, 14 feet. Right. And
yeah. I've heard, and I think those heights are mostly out like where you are.
Oh, great.
Well, you've got all those big, great forests and
lots of food, lots of berries, everything. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I think that they were sort of clustered in my own mind, just from reading. I've formed these general impressions. It's by no means law, but in my own mind, it seems logical that if they started out there and then kind of made their way eastward, the less cover there was when they went somewhere. Right. The shorter ones probably tended to survive better.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Well, they got to go through the
Great Plains.
The Great Plains there, where they cut out all the trees.
Right. Yeah.
Flatlands.
Yeah. So, I mean, they might have gone up through Canada and then down again. I don't know, but it does seem that the large heights come predominantly from the West Coast area. Not always, but predominantly. And up into Canada, I think where it gets real wild, in the wilds of Canada, I think that's where they seem to be bigger as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I was wondering now, in terms of the Dogman, what are the height ranges that are reported with those? Yeah.
Well, those tend to vary. Generally, they're between 5.5 and 7 feet tall. Okay. Occasionally, there will be taller ones, and I've heard some people, credit them with being like 10 feet tall or 11 feet tall, which is huge. And if you think about it, the very largest timber wolves, gray wolves, are about they can be up to 7 feet from the nose to where the tail would begin. You know, just the body itself. And stand up to be a little over 7 feet tall if they're standing. But you get too much over that, you know, and you start really wondering if a canine can be that big. And I'm not sure, but there are some people who have reported it. But most of them fall in that 5.5 to 7 foot range.
Wow. And now, Don, you were going to ask.
Yeah, because you were talking about well, Brent brought up the idea, you know, who would win in a cage fight, basically. But I was wondering because we've talked to like Jim Bear King, you know, and he says that that in general Bigfoots are, unless you really cross a line, they just kind of leave you alone for the most part. But
Right.
My vision of that would be Dogman would seem more aggressive, and they would be more, because a canine can, you look at a canine wrong sometimes and they just flip. Now that's not always, because I'm a big pit bull lover, so I don't believe that's always true. But I've always heard that dogmen are very aggressive as compared to a Bigfoot. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I think in general, it may be just that they look more aggressive to us because they've got the big pointed fangs and the claws, and maybe they're more embedded in our consciousness as looking like wolves, which are dangerous. So that might be one thing. It's the psychological aspect that we come equipped with when we're looking at them.
Right.
But it also, I think, could be that if going just by the reports that I've had over 26 some years, and I still get reports, every week I get 1 or 2 or 3 from various things and usabilities. I don't even think that's a word. It must be getting late. I'm starting to make up words. But the thing is that with the dogmen or upright canines, they can look really vicious, but they seem to make this kind of show of bravado, snarling, maybe chasing the people for a little ways.
Right.
And then people will always say, it could have gotten me. I know it could have, had me for lunch if it wanted, but then at the last second, it just broke off and ran into the trees or into the cornfield or into the brush or whatever is there for cover, because it's seldom just seen without any cover at all.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think it seems in their case that they're more like some sort of making some sort of territorial display to get you out of their feeding grounds or breeding grounds or whatever they've got going on. Because again, I've only had one reported injury that required doctor's attention in all these years myself. There are some other stories that I don't say yay or nay on because I haven't studied them myself, and I don't doubt that there could be some attacks because they do obviously have the equipment to hurt people if they wanted to, and with all the numbers of sightings, it seems bound to happen sooner or later. But the other thing is that we're primates and we're not always keyed in to exactly read the expressions on a canine's face. For instance, my husband's family had this great old farm dog, just a mutt, and her name was Wendy. And Wendy just loved people, and she loved to smile at people. And I remember the first time I met Wendy, I thought, oh no, this dog's going to, have me for dinner, because they're a huge mouthful of these sharp teeth. Mm-hmm. And it turns out she thought she was smiling. But to me, it looked like a horrendous death grimace.
Oh, goodness. Right. Yeah.
So, and it's totally a matter of my interpretation of her bearing all those teeth. Mm-hmm. So there may be some bit of that as well, where if there's what we have is a problem in communication. Is that how the line goes? Something like that.
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
That's it. You got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So it seems like the aggression that they show is more of just, getting you off the land, or out of their territory, as you said. So, and that's good to know, because we know that Bigfoot will herd people out of their territory by throwing rocks and intimidating them through, different grunts and things like that. So, that's good to know that, they at least give you a chance to make the right decision.
They seem to, and again, I wouldn't risk it. Like I
Right.
wouldn't say, oh well, so they're really good, and I can just go up and get real close and take a picture, and it's not going to hurt me. I still, would say treat them with the same respect you would treat any predatory animal that you would run up against,
Right.
because we don't really know for sure. Nobody can guarantee anything. If you're out in the woods or a state forest or state park, you're in the real world,
Yeah,
and if
yeah.
something's happening, you have to take care of yourself.
Right.
Yep.
Now, do you think that that the Dogman is operating in that same range of intelligence as what Bigfoots are
Good
alleged
question.
to work at?
I don't know if it's fair to compare the intelligence of a canine and a primate. I think they may be very intelligent, both of them, but in different ways, just because their bodies are different and they're developed differently, and they're just different animals or
Sure.
creatures.
Right.
So I think they're both extremely intelligent, and many witnesses, Dogman witnesses, have said to me, it locked eyes with me, and I felt that it was much more intelligent than your average
Oh.
animal of any kind, and sometimes they'll feel that it's sending them a message, not in English so much, but just an impression, like it would get me if I told anyone, or it could jump on the hood of my car if it wanted, or and again, these are just sort of let me scare you as badly as I can messages,
Right.
So,
and maybe you'll leave and get out of my dinner network here.
There you go.
so a lot of posturing, but with a definite end game in mind, and it could escalate if it doesn't go well.
I think that's fair to say. And when it comes to pets, I mean, the Dogman, hands down, is really got quite a few incidents recorded where it's taken people's pets, and carried them off, or broken them in half, or whatever. They're much less tolerant, and that's a general canine feature too. They're not tolerant of being challenged by other animals on their own turf.
So, because they resemble canines, I mean, would you agree that they probably are in a canid family, or in that family tree somehow? Or do you think that they're just something all different? But you know what I mean? It's just because, of course,
I think there are different things that people might be seeing, and I don't use the word species because I don't think it's even that close. The great majority of sightings that I receive are what I call just the regular. If something that other people call a werewolf can be considered normal and regular, but this would be the one that's 5.5 to 7 feet tall, walking like a human, looks otherwise for all the world like an upright wolf or wolf dog hybrid.
Okay.
They don't really have human features. I always say if you found a dead one, you just think, oh, there's a kind of a weird looking, huge dead canine. But then you hear these reports of others, and they seem to be more and more frequent, where people are saying, well, it was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. It had shoulders and muscles like a bodybuilder human, up with shorter hair than usual. Usually it'll be short black hair, not always, sometimes shaggy, but had the head and the ears and the muzzle and the fangs and all that of a canine. And very often these types of incidents will turn up near military sites and near Native American land holdings. And some people link them to the skinwalkers or the shapeshifters that, are kind of that's a whole nother story in itself, and is not, it would not involve a wolf or some kind of creature changing or adapting. It's starting out with a human that is able to adapt or change or project somehow this image of a different type of canine. But that's a human to canine. The other one just seems to be a canine imitating humans. And there are other sort of types too. I mean, people will list as many as 7 types, 10 types, 12 types.
Wow.
And I don't think those are necessarily always types exactly. It's just sometimes you're observing different characteristics, just like if you talked about, we would never talk about types of humans.
Right, true.
Because you might find, a Scandinavian person, a man who is like 7 feet tall, and everybody on the street is 7 feet tall, and with white hair. And then you might find somebody who's very short and has a different color hair, and we're all just humans. We're not types or different species of humans. We're human. That's what we are.
That's very true. And we are going to go to our last break of the night already. Woo-hoo. It's gone that fast, ladies and gentlemen, but we will be back. I'm just going to do the exit whether the bumper music comes in or not, because we will not be fooled again here on the portal. But we're going to take a break, ladies and gentlemen, so don't go away. We'll be back for the last half hour of our show with Linda Godfrey. And make sure you check out her blog at lindagodfrey.com. And you can see all of the material and reports that she has up there. So we'll be right back in a couple minutes. Don't go away.
Hey, everyone, it's Chris.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the last half hour of our show. It's gone so incredibly fast.
Yes.
But such is the case whenever you have a good conversation and a phenomenal discussion. So, Don, how's your night going?
So far, it's going good. Having a little issue with the internet, but I've got that figured out. It's pretty simple. But I just enjoy listening to these stories, whether it be the Bigfoot stories or Linda's stories about the Dogman, because the Dogman is something that we don't get to cover a whole lot, and hence the reason we love Linda.
And of course, welcome back to the show, Linda.
Thank you. That is so sweet. I really appreciate that.
Well, it is phenomenal to have you on, and your experiences aside, you're just such a pleasant person to talk to.
Yes,
it's just so easy to get involved in conversation with you. So thanks for making it easy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll have to remember and tell my husband you said that. Next time he complains I'm not easy to get along with.
Well, there is something to be said for relationships.
I think that's a married person prerogative.
Yeah.
And I'm joking. My husband's very, very supportive. If it weren't for him, I would not have been able to pursue this line of work the way that I have, Right. So I give him major credit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Behind every successful researcher is a very understanding spouse
and a wage earner.
Yeah. Well, that helps too, for sure. But I was gonna ask you of all of the stories that you've collected, are there any that stand out? Well, I'm sure there's many that stand out to you, but we got a half hour left, and if you don't mind, I'd like to hear some of the more profound reports you've taken.
Okay, well, I actually had this out for some reason.
Oh, by all means.
It's a message that I got a couple of years ago, and for some reason it got stuck between two reports, which happens to me every once in a while, and I found it. And it hasn't been published, but I was so taken, especially since I told about my 7-year-old grandson, because he was younger when this happened. And you're just going to like the description here, because it's a very unique description of what he saw, and I'm still not exactly sure what it was. But he wrote, "My name is," and then gives his name. I don't have his permission to use it, but his full name and stuff is on here. His contact info. He says, "I know that you investigate the Dogman, A.K. Bray Road Beast. I just wanted to tell you about something I saw now twice that was weird, for a lack of a better word. The first time was outside of Blanchardville in around 2007 or 2008 on North Lake Road between Blanchardville and Argyle." And that's kind of north of Madison, Wisconsin. Okay. Madison's our state capital. But it turns to very rural area very quickly as you drive north from the city. And he said, "I was coming home in the evening after work, and I saw something that I describe as looking like a monkey on roller skates."
Ah,
wow.
How's that for a description? That's the first time I ever heard that one. It was an animal about the size of a 7 to 8-year-old kid in the road. It was black, and it ran like nothing I've ever seen. It had long arms and ran weird, kind of galloped along the road. And I think he means he followed it along in his car. I have to admit, I was trying to hit the dang thing because I knew nobody was going to believe me, and because it scared me.
Yeah.
I had never had anybody admit that before. The thing was fast, real fast. If needed, I could take you to the place I saw it. I told my mom, I think he was a teenager when this happened. I saw something weird and left it at that. A few days later, she saw it too, in roughly the same area I had, and described it the same way. I hadn't told her how it looked, just that I'd seen a weird animal in the road and that I had tried to run it down. I always felt scared when in the woods around there, like someone was watching me. And my brother told me the same thing. He didn't like going out to cut wood in the trees around there because he felt like he was being watched, and he always hurried to get enough wood and get out of there. And the second time he saw it was about 2 weeks ago, and this was August 2014. So August must be a good month around there. Outside of Beaver Dam, where I now live. Beaver Dam is a small town farther north yet than those other ones, kind of in mid-central, eastern, to the eastern side. And he wrote, again, I was driving home from work at about 6:15 to 6:30 p.m. and I saw this thing in the woods standing there on the edge. This time I got a real good look. It was dark, almost black, and it looked like a wolf, but it was standing upright like a man. It didn't have pointy ears, though its ears were kind of rounded like a bear, but this was no bear. And I've seen dogs with ears like that, too. I know exactly what he means. It was kind of droopy, slouchy, with its arms hanging way down by its knees, and it had a real small waist. So, which makes me think of Dogman rather than Bigfoot, because they're not noted for small waists. But he said I could see its face real good, and I slammed on my brakes and looked at it, thinking it was a kid or someone put a Halloween decoration out by the woods. It moved. I drove forward then, backed up, because I thought, no way, I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. As I backed up, it leaned to the side to get a better look at me, and I could see its teeth, and it blinked its eyes. That's when I said, blank that, and I sped off home. I do not drink or do drugs. I saw what I saw. I wanted to go back and look for tracks, but it rained, so I figured they'd been washed away. It was spooky and creepy, and I would just like to know what it is. Hate to say, but I do wish I had hit the thing. I'm willing to speak with you about it. Haven't told anybody but my mother. So,
wow.
I thought that was a pretty profound in many ways, you know. And I'm working on getting down better details with this person, and I'll be posting it either on probably posted on my blog, I think, because it's been let go a little. But a monkey on roller skates. Now, I'm still not sure.
Yeah,
exactly what it was after reading that, and I'm trying to get a better description of the face, because he said he had a really good look at it, but I didn't feel I got a really good description from that.
But
so
I'm sorry. The stature was smaller though, like
a 7 or 8 year old kid. Is that what he said?
That's what he said the first time. Okay. Yeah, and so that would be, you know, maybe about 4 feet tall.
Sure.
Wow. Okay.
Something like that. And that's another reason I'm interested, because I have had people report shorter ones. You know, again, it doesn't always happen. I did have one person in the land between the lakes leaving a campground see a tall, like a 6 foot tall one with 2 younger pups crossing a road as he left this very remote campground. And outside of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, a man and his daughter both saw a short one about that same height crossing the road. And if you think about it, if they are, you know, the ones that look just like outsized timber wolves, if they're natural creatures, they have to breed, they have to have pups, and you know, there should be different sizes of them walking around if they're a natural creature. So that makes sense to me. But the fact that he likened it to a Halloween decoration, I think he's probably meaning that the face was pretty scary, you know, and he mentioned fangs, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm working on getting a better description, but I'm sure glad that he sent this in, because the monkey on roller skates makes me think of the Bigfoot with the smooth gliding stride.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Like it was very graceful and not bobbing up and down or whatever.
Like he's moonwalking in reverse.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And in this case, too, the one thing that stopped me was the narrow waist. But if it's a juvenile Bigfoot, it really could have a narrow waist.
Sure.
You know, and I've had several Dogman sightings right around that area north of Madison, more than several actually, and not so many Bigfoot, but they get around to the same places, and it wouldn't surprise me, you know, if it was one, or it was could be you know, a smaller juvenile Dogman too. So
now I've heard that in my many years of reading through different research and different opinions of researchers, but somebody, and I can't remember who the researcher is to attribute it to, but they claim that dogmen stay pretty exclusively near running bodies of water, like streams and lakes and ponds, and like they don't ever stray far from waterways. Have you found that correlation as well?
Well, I think I'm probably one of the people that has said that.
Okay.
It's just that I noticed very, very early on, that I started a habit of looking at a map whenever I got a report and seeing what was around there. And there would almost always be a river or handy lakes nearby.
Yeah.
And I also noticed that, and this is still true today, that there are many more reports east of the Mississippi than there are west. And east of the Mississippi is a much better watered region of the United States than is our western states,
That's
where
true,
we've got
yeah.
deserts and dry areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also there are concentrations of sightings all around the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in general that probably does hold true.
So are they? So they're not migratory then?
I still think they could be migratory, and again, I look at the map of the United States and places where they're concentrated, and around the Great Lakes is the great bulk, but then there are sort of like spikes reaching down. There's one that goes down through Oklahoma, down into Texas. There's another one that goes down through Indiana and then down into Kentucky and over to Georgia, down into Florida. And then there's another one that continues through Ohio and Pennsylvania, big time Dogman sighting states, and Bigfoot, both of them.
Wow.
And that's heading up toward the northeast, toward Maine and New York State, where we also have lots of sightings. But it seems like there are these big spurs where they find convenient corridors for one reason or another, and I've often postulated, well, they're mammals that rely on a lot of protein for their subsistence. If you just take into account how often they're seen carrying around, especially dogman, even going after roadkill, and both of them going after deer, and you need water to digest protein.
Right.
And just in general, that's also where the prey goes. Everything goes to the water hole to drink, just like in Africa.
Right.
Sure.
So it makes a lot of sense to me that they would seek out those types.
Well, and that's kind of I would think that knowing how it is up here, the deer are migratory. They go a little south. They try to stay out of the snow belt, and I've had elk die in my driveway. So I know they're there. And I know, however, I know that the coyotes are still there during the hard winter. So. They, as you said, they need a lot of protein in their diet, so it would make sense that they would follow the herds. But once again, as I said, coyotes might be migratory, but they really, up here, they're not. So, it may be one of those things that, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depending on how the season was and how they were able to fatten up during the summer, So that's the way I was thinking, at least.
Right. And, well, coyotes, they may not be strictly migratory in the thoughts of something that goes down south and then comes back or whatever, but there have been science articles lately about, or zoological studies done on them, because they're generally moving more and more eastward and mating with wolves and coming up with these kind of super coyotes.
Oh, yeah.
And they call them coy wolves.
Right.
And they're a lot less afraid of people than the timber wolves are, and can be considered more. I think they're considered more dangerous than just the regular coyotes, especially when they have their pack behavior. So.
Now, in terms of the dogmen, I think with Bigfoot, it's pretty well regarded that they're. And I think Don called it right, an opportunivore.
Yeah, an opportunivore.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a great term.
And I like that too. Yeah, it was pretty dead on. But would you say that the dogman is much more carnivore and not so much an omnivore?
Well, just in terms of what most people have observed it eating, and I guess that, I've read that it's surprising that wolves will actually eat a lot more plant material than most people would think. They'll eat grass and certain occasions, and they'll eat certain berries and things like that.
Oh, okay.
They're not as much of an omnivore as, say, a bear, but they do eat more plant material than people realize. But, you know, I think I'm really interested in the Bigfoot's diet, because that seems so varied. And I've read several accounts of them standing in marshes where there are cattails, and pulling up the cattails and then taking the roots and actually laying them in a neat pile and stacking them up to take with them, or their seed carrying them. You know, so I think if there could be a real study done of all their diets, it would probably be fascinating. I think they probably both catch turkeys and things like that too.
Sure. Oh, we got bunches of those up in my house too. Oh my goodness! Why'd the turkey cross the road? To tick me off.
To go to Don's house.
They don't get much past there.
Yeah. Wow.
You don't want to hit one with your car either, because the way they are, they hit the car low and inflict the most damage, and then can bounce up on the hood and come through your windshield and get you. You know,
and they're just dumb enough to do it.
Yeah.
Plus, I wouldn't want to hit one. They're pretty cool. You know, they're pretty cool animals.
Yeah, they are. And I'm surprised at how tame they seem to be. I mean, you hear about these turkey hunters going out in the woods and, you know, and going for hours and hiking and looking, and it's like, well, yeah, but they're in the yard over here eating stuff all day long. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Yeah, that was my husband is a real outdoorsman hunter, turkey and deer and everything. And we would have huge herds in our backyard, 20 deer, 25 turkeys, and then he'd go deer and turkey hunting and never see one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he felt they were taunting him.
Well, they can read the calendar. They know when it's open season.
Yeah.
That's true. They somehow sense it. I swear. You know, I really do. And by the way, I'm feeling kind of bad about, I don't want anybody to get the impression from that letter that I was reading from that I approve of trying to run down animals in any way or sense, just because this guy, he was a teenager, I think, and he was acting scared. He didn't know what else to do, and he was hoping to get some answer as to what the thing was. Not that I condone it, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and we agree. I mean, it's just never a good idea to run down animals at all, but... You know, I'm sure that in his mind it was like, how am I ever going to make people believe this?
Yeah,
you know, and so, you know, you hear the old saying in the Bigfoot community as well. It's like, you got to produce a body. You got to produce a body. Well, I'm not a real big advocate of that either, but some people are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are other ways to do it. So.
Yeah, I agree as well. So, were there any other cases that kind of jump out in your mind as being quite fascinating?
Well, I don't know if we covered any of the ones in the Monsters Among Us book when I was here last time, but I have to say that there are a couple in that one that people very often bring up as being quite striking and unusual. And my next book that's coming up that will be out probably now, they're predicting next summer, because it just takes a lot of work to for these publishers that are larger to get a book through and do everything that they do to make them the best they can be. But Monsters, that I was just going to say, that book is going to be much more on the way outside. But this one, I think the story that people bring up the most is probably the Northern Illinois church wolf lady.
Church wolf lady.
Church wolf lady, which sounds weird, and it really was scary. This happened probably about, I'm going to guess, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And the couple reported it to me just while I was taking or picking out stories for this particular book. But the Church Lady Monster is the actual title of it. And it was told to me by this very nice, down-to-earth, middle-aged couple. The husband was former military. The wife was a housewife. They were very devoted Christian people, by their own description. And they went to a church in Northern Illinois, very devout churchgoers, had 2 children. And they went to kind of a small church with an older congregation, and the pews were all arranged in a U shape, so that if you were sitting in the front pew, you were kind of looking directly across at the other person in the pew. And they were sitting there one day and listening to the sermon, and it was there was a woman that came in after the service started and sat down sort of across from them, and they said they didn't know her really well. She was new. Mm-hmm. And she was dressed kind of nondescriptly. She had dark hair, kind of a dark skirt on, light colored, nothing you would really remember as striking you. But they said she seemed nervous, and they noticed that she was kind of twitching every once in a while. And we're kind of wondering if, if it was something they should offer to help with or whatever. So the minister finished his service and was just stepping down from the altar area to take part in their song portion of the service. And just as he stood up and started to walk down, this woman stood up, let out a blood-curdling scream, and most people in the congregation, this couple said, had their hymnals open, and they were, trying to find where they were going to be singing from, and so they kind of missed a lot of it. That and the fact of the U-shapes also blocked them out from a certain large portion of the church, so not everybody saw what happened next. She let out this scream, and within like the twinkling of an eye, she became the form of a gray-furred wolf.
Oh my!
Oh my God!
And yeah, and bigger, and no clothing. Just like a wolf would be. Just the fur. Wow. And just as that happened, the pastor was passing by. He held his Bible out at the creature, and because it was the time, between. It was that time I think the ushers were either getting the collection plates out or something, but they happened to be up there, and they all grabbed her at once and kind of wrestled this thing. It wasn't like they were grabbing the woman, they were grabbing this thing, wrestled it down onto the pew, and immediately she transformed back into this woman.
That's crazy.
Oh, wow.
And this family is sitting there horrified.
Yeah.
And they watched as the ushers kind of led her out through the back, and they didn't see her again. She stayed the woman shape, and they said they didn't know where she went, and they weren't able to access the usual video of the sermon that was taken for shut-ins and that sort of thing. They wanted to. Wow. And they said people were kind of going, well, what was that? What was that? But not everybody had a good look because it happened and was over so fast.
Wow.
That they didn't. But the couple, the couple's daughter, they tried to tell her that it was just some kind of, I don't know, they made up some kind of real superficial thing about it. And the daughter said, do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm blind? And I didn't see that?
Oh, my God.
And because this was such an unusual story, I not only met with them three separate times in person. Once I took my husband along for my truthometer. He's real good at that. Uh-huh. And never did they change in their story. Never did they waver in what they wanted to say. They didn't want their names known. They didn't want any publicity from it. They just wanted people to know. And wow. The church itself, and they gave me a lot of details, incidental details as they were telling me things. And I wrote them all down. And in this day of the internet, you can check things out pretty easily. Every single thing they told me checked out. Wow. The church, I found out that the church was indeed at the place where they said it was in this small town, but had since been it's no longer a church. It became part of another building. So you wouldn't find it if you went there. But they said they moved away, and it was an older congregation that sort of, they were kind of slowly passing away too, and sure. And the church population had dwindled within a couple of years to just small enough that it didn't exist anymore. But everything I checked out was great. I had them sign an affidavit saying to the best of their knowledge everything they were telling me was true and exactly as they told it, and they happily did that. Wow. The husband drew a sketch. Mm-hmm. Of what this thing looked like, which I have in the book.
Oh, phenomenal.
So I'd say it's really hard to top that one.
No, that's about as far out there as you can get. But amazing story, and I believe that anything is possible. So,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for being with us tonight, Linda. I just can't thank you enough. It's always such a rare pleasure to have this opportunity to have you on the show, and I hope you'll come back again sometime.
I would love to. I'd be very happy to. And if anybody has a story they want to report, or you're curious about my book titles, or want to read a lot of other, I've been posting quite a few from Michigan that haven't been any books or elsewhere. Just lindagodfrey.com will get you the keys to everything. So there's an about page and all sorts of things. And if you're curious about the church lady story, that's in Monsters Among Us.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that wraps it up for us tonight. We got about 10 seconds left, so stick around for Jimmy Jean Into the Microcosm coming up next on TFR. And we love you, and we'll be back tomorrow night. Be good, be kind, be nice, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Good night. Okay, I'm going to call you right back, Linda.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Did you end the stream?
No, I didn't. Did I? Oops. Good night, YouTube. Love you guys. Take care. Be good.